So today is actually my anniversary, and even though I normally try to keep my private life private, I couldn't let the day pass without some kind of recognition. 10 years ago, I fell head over heels for the love of my life. Happy anniversary to the book that holds the distinction of being my number one for over a decade. That's the longest I've ever loved one book, and it's held my favorite spot. Uninterrupted, unchallenged. So back in summer of 2015, I saw the trailer for Gone Girl. The movie wasn't going to come out for another month. It was coming out in July. I said, I can't wait. I have to know how it ends right now. And I ran out and I got the book, and it's been true love ever since. And what better way to celebrate than with an in-depth analysis? So because Amy is such an amazing character and so overwhelming, people often miss how complex and incredibly well written the Nick character is. Even though his narrative plays off of Amy, he is more than just a respondent. His familial background, his relationship with other characters, the way he has a curious lack of any real in-depth male relationships. The perfect way he is both a complete individual and a microcosm of men as a whole. The technical skill it took to pull this off, it really crowns Gillian Flynn as one of the best writers of the generation. The deep, innate understanding of men that can be gleaned from examining the Nick character is the equal or better of anything you can find in American Psycho or Fight Club. So today I'm going to be doing an in-depth analysis of the Nick character and several of the other men in Gone Girl. I already covered all the women of the text, Amy, Margot, Nick's twin, his mother, Maureen, his mistress, Andy, and others in my first analysis of Gone Girl, so you can check that out. And if you want more content like this, just hit that like and subscribe button below. You didn't do it right now. Go ahead and subscribe. All right, let's get started. So let's talk about the origin of Nick Dunne. Nick is really an incel, and he won, and he was still miserable. Nick got everything men think that they're entitled to. He got his dream job, his dream rich cool girl, and yet long before he lost his job and the money ran out on Amy's side, he was already deeply dissatisfied in his life because it's not about any of that. Let's start at the beginning. Nick was born to a bitter man who settled and the unhappy woman he settled for. When Nick talks about his childhood at all, it's about how rageful his father was and how impotent his mother was. How his father's anger and dissatisfaction filled the house. How he would throw things at his mother. He would say, I never hit her, but he would throw things at her head, at walls, which we know is abuse. How his mother was thin with dis-ease, with unhappiness. The moment Maureen divorces Bill, her husband, she starts gaining weight, becomes jovial and cheerful. And Nick says, she became like that, moderately larger and extremely happy for the rest of her life. And her sister would say things like, thank God the old Maureen's back again. Because Bill Dunne, his father, was a kind of man who sucked the air out of every room he was in. Nick internalizes his father's entitlement and rage. And a lot of men, like, the incels, would have you believe that they're only rageful because they didn't get what they wanted. If they got what they wanted, they would be happy-go-lucky. But Nick disproves this every time. He was only happy as long as everything was perfect, but he wasn't even always happy then. According to him, he was happiest when he was working hard to win Amy's heart. As he said, he was his best self when he loved her, which is unsurprising because men want to work hard for what they want. But Nick wanted the same results with no investment. He started getting angry after they got married, and he supposedly had it all. Amy's parents had gifted them a brownstone in New York as a wedding gift. He had access to Amy's trust fund. But because her parents made him sign a prenup and the house was in Amy's name, he began to realize he was always going to be a kid who had his face pressed up against the glass of the things he really wanted. He didn't want to feel like he was living on his wife's largesse. He wanted to feel like he had earned all of this and it was his. And this is when his jealousy of Amy really began to flower. When they were still just dating, he felt like he was going to get the keys to the kingdom. But after they got married and it became clear that she was still the girl and he was just the guy behind the girl, essentially Mr. Amy Dunne, He resented having to do the work of wooing her. This is when he got lazy on his end and he started to shift all the blame for his dissatisfaction with himself for not being smart enough, not rich enough, not cultured enough onto Amy because she was still perfect in his eyes. He was just mad. He felt like he wasn't good enough. He couldn't compete. And it shows how if you give these guys the girl of their dreams, they're going to be happy for a minute, just like Nick, but they know they didn't really earn her. They know they faked it like Nick. And a lot of people don't realize Amy was playing the cool girl, but Nick was also playing a role. Who he was pretending to be when he got into a relationship with Amy wasn't who he really was. As he said, he had to study for their dates. He was looking things up and memorizing things, the Code Duello and Arcania, just to keep her interested. So he knows he's a hollow man, and he's terrified he's going to be exposed as a fraud. And Nick was preemptively cheating with Andy, not because he knew Amy was crazy, but he knew that one day she was going to get sick of his BS and dump him. He was always jealous of Desi Collins and afraid Amy was going to leave, if not for Desi, for someone just like him, someone who was born to her world, because that's the dirty little secret men don't want you to know. They don't want the girl, they want to be the girl. Perhaps not literally, but Nick was jealous of all of Amy's gifts. She had everything he wanted, including his own father's approval. Something Nick himself never got, but desperately wanted. Nick said of his father, "I always felt like Amy must remind him of an old girlfriend or something, the one who got away." Even after he got Alzheimer's, he was kind of rude and awful, and Margot, his twin, said yeah, but he kind of wanted to impress her at the same time. Your basic, jerky 12-year-old boy trapped in a 60-year-old asshole's body. Nick was a boy and then a man who was starving for his father's affection and attention. He never gets it, but Amy does. So Nick has been taught consciously or unconsciously, Amy is the standard. She's the type all the men, including his own father, envy him for having. So after Nick wins, after he has Amy and marries her, he's angry because every minute of the day he's forced to confront his own inferiority compared to her. But he's not going to let go because she's the thing that he has, the one thing that signifies his superiority to all the rest of the men. So he's never going to let go. And part of the reason Nick is so angry and bitter towards Amy is because he always knew he was not up to her level of play, but he sort of psyched himself out. He made himself go after her because he couldn't stand who he was without her, but he also couldn't stand who he was with her. And now we come to the question that's been on a lot of your minds. For those who read the book, you know Amy and Nick met at a party. They hang out all night. He takes her home. They share that great kiss in the sugar clouds at the bakery, and then he never calls her back. Nick intentionally ghosted her. We all know this. He claims, "Oh, your number got messed up in the laundry, and then I forgot about asking the host to call you for your number, blah, blah, blah." But we all know what a blow-off sounds like. Nick blew her off. The question is, why did he do it? After reading and rereading this text, I finally have the answer. And this is the secret. This is the key to Nick Dunne's character. Nick was afraid. Nick had gone for comfortable and convenient his entire life, and he did not think he could really get Amy, and he was afraid to try and fail. Let's go to the text. Page 59, he meets Detective Rhonda Boney when his wife goes missing. He says, "Wow, this woman was surprisingly ugly, brazenly, beyond the scope of everyday ugly." And he describes her and says, "I have an affinity for ugly women." I was raised by a trio of women who were hard on the eyes. My grandmother, my mom, her sister, and they were all smart and kind and funny and sturdy. Good women. Amy was the first pretty girl I ever dated, really dated. There's what I like to call a Nickism. He says something like it's supposed to be a virtue. "Oh, I've only been with ugly girls. Oh my God, I was raised by ugly women. I love ugly women. They're the best." And then he ends with the real truth. Amy was the first pretty girl he ever really dated, not because he couldn't pull, because again, canonically, Nick is gorgeous. Amy goes gaga over him because he's so handsome, and she lists all the women in the book who are just super into him, including Detective Boney. The man is an accused murderer who, might have done away with his pregnant wife, and she's gooing and cooing over him. He is fine. So it's not that Nick cannot pull better looking women. It's that he doesn't want to gamble when he can have a sure thing. Nick is insecure, and he has a habit of praising things he secretly despises. Again, this is behavior that's endemic to men as a whole. They will lift up the virtues of something that they can't stand. Another great example is Nick and Missouri. Oh, how he loved to talk about Missouri to Amy, especially when they first met. Oh, Missouri was so beautiful. It was a magical place, and he hadn't set foot in the state since he left it for New York. He didn't want to go back and care for his mother or his father, but it was the right thing to do on paper. So he went back there. But he couldn't stand being there. He wanted to be somewhere else all the time. He would praise something verbally with his mouth, but he would be putting it down in his heart. We'll come back to Nick and his presentism or lack thereof in a moment. So Nick was handsome and he was packing. Don't forget that. Amy was quick to tell us he was gifted below the belt. So it wasn't that Nick didn't have options. He was just a scaredy cat. He was insecure, and with women less attractive than him, he thought, I don't have to try. He didn't fear that they were going to leave. He thought they would be grateful. They couldn't do better than him. So he gets with Amy, and he's constantly afraid, and that's why he doesn't call her back. He used up all of his witty banter that night, and Amy says all he had then were bad puns about guy movies like The Sure Thing. Nick is afraid that if he calls her, he's not going to be able to sustain the relationship. She will see that he's mediocre and leave him. Like so many incel dudes who are playing the tough role, he's actually nothing more than a scared boy who's afraid he can't hack it. And notice that Tommy's ex-boyfriend, the one who she accused of rape falsely, Tommy O'Hara, says the same thing as Nick. Oh, I don't click with a lot of girls, at least not girls who look like Amy. You hear that subtle implication that you're not even a woman, you're not a human if you don't look like Amy? There's a reason Tommy O'Hara says almost the identical phrase as Nick about Amy. Gone Girl is a long book, but Gillian Flynn is a master economist when it comes to words. No phrase is wasted. She gave both of these dorky, incelish type guys the girl of their dreams. She gave them the cool girl experience. She looks the way that they want, and it's still not enough. According to these men, they had met the girl of their dreams, but the moment she asked them to do any work in the relationship, they both start whining and pouting. Tommy is who Amy practices and perfects her cool girl persona on, because when Nick doesn't call her back, when he ghosts her, she starts thinking, well, maybe I'm the problem. Maybe I didn't do this right. So he's her experiment. And just like Nick does after they get married, Tommy cheats on her. Stay with me. Not because he found someone better, but because Amy was too perfect for him. And she had the nerve to expect him to contribute to the relationship. He says, oh my God, I meet this gorgeous girl and she likes the same movies and comedy as me. And I'm thinking, what's the catch? Oh, here's the catch. This isn't going to be easy. She wants me to do some work in the relationship. He literally says, that's the catch. This isn't going to be easy. And so I start dating another girl. He doesn't mention her by name or physical description. He's still oohing and cooing over Amy, but he's like, it got to be hard. So screw that. I started cheating on her behind her back. And Tommy O'Hara says when Nick asked, why didn't you break it off? Oh, because she was gorgeous and I'm an idiot. Gillian Flynn is so brilliant because she really gets inside the mind of men. I don't think anybody has written a character that they are not this well since Bebe Moore Campbell. I mean, Bebe Moore Campbell so brilliantly gets into the minds of white women and men as a black woman writer, R.I.P. And Gillian Flynn does the same thing here with men. She reads men up and down through their own words just so realistically because that is how they actually operate. There's that gnawing dissatisfaction, the internal unhappiness. Even when they get what they said they wanted, they always want something else, something more. And by the way, the plot of Gone Girl only works because the men in the book are so quick to believe the worst of each other because they know the secret that other men are not to be trusted. Every lie Amy told to get what she wanted hinged on the idea of a male boogeyman out to get her that the other men had to save her from. Remember, Amy told her dad and later Nick that she was afraid of Desi, that once they broke up back in prep school, he tried to unalive himself in her room and was naked on her bed. She told Desi, that her father, Rand, harmed her as a child, and that Nick put his hands on her and assaulted her regularly. Now, none of that was true. Amy's father didn't abuse her. Nick didn't abuse her. Desi didn't try to unalive himself, and he didn't do anything to her. But the men never tried to verify any of this information through a third party. They never even confronted each other about these separate allegations because it's a performance of virtue. When Amy tells them, oh, I've suffered at the hands of such and such a man, they all say the right things and they pretend to want to defend her honor, but they never even confront the person openly or try to get Amy some help because they don't actually care about the abuse she suffered or getting her justice. They only care about how the supposed abuse makes Amy more pliable for what they want. Amy tells Desi that Nick beats her constantly, so much that she miscarried her child and that she's now on the run for her life. And Desi's first solution is, you should just divorce Nick so you can marry me, the right man, at long last. He had more sympathy for Amy chopping off her hair than her having a miscarriage. He strokes her head and says, oh, your poor hair. And he doesn't even ask about the baby. And Amy says to herself, I knew he wouldn't, because she knows it's a performance. He pretends to be a loving, sympathetic guy, but really he just wants a victim who can never leave him. You have to remember, Desi thinks this is all real. He has no clue she's lying, but when Amy goes missing, he doesn't go to the police with what he's been told about her father abusing her in the past, even though he shows up to search for her in Missouri. He doesn't say anything to Nick about it, aside from asking Nick if her father was really in New York when Amy was taken. And that's because Desi wanted the ego boost of thinking he knew more about Amy than anyone else, more than he wanted her found. Rand, her father, and Nick are the same way. It always bothered me that Mary Beth and Rand, Amy's parents, got together with Amy to have Hillary Handy, the girl who Amy falsely accused of stalking her, expelled. But they never tried to do anything about Desi supposedly being obsessed with her and trying to unalive himself in her room on her bed. Same thing with Desi writing letters and whatnot to Amy. Her parents, especially her father, never step in and stop it, even though they claim to be so concerned. And Nick claims to have been bothered by Desi's existence for years, but he never says anything to him, doesn't even bother to talk to him, despite Amy saying she's terrified of him, until Amy's parents insist that Nick confront Desi after Amy goes missing. And even then, Nick only throws a supposed suicide attempt in Desi's face in order to rattle him and make him look unhinged, not in a genuine effort to find Amy. But in order to really unpack the Nick-Desi dynamic, we have to go back to the beginning. So Nick, Amy's husband, and Desi, her ex-boyfriend, both desperately want to be with Amy, although neither of them actually care about her as a person. They want to be with her because of what she represents. Men are in competition with each other, and simultaneously they look to other men for approval. And women are the yardstick they use to measure themselves with. Nick is jealous of Desi, and Desi is jealous of Nick, and they both want to get Amy, to win her, to prove that they've won. Nick has been cheating on Amy for over a year with his younger, bouncier, cool girl, Andy, but he still won't let go. And he says, oh, it's financial because Amy paid for the bar or this or that. But the real reason he won't let go of Amy is because Amy is the only thing in his life that ever made him feel like the man. He's constantly going on about how Amy has been what's made him. He says, I was my best self when I loved Amy, and I was my second best self when I hated Amy. So when he was first trying to get her, he had to become a student of arcane trivia to get her interested. He's constantly trying to keep up with her. He was trying to lure her with intelligence, with mental acuity, to make him believe that he was up to her level. You know, people talk about Amy playing the cool girl, but Nick was playing a role too when they met. He's insecure because of how he grew up. He was poor, his father didn't love him, and he's always been fighting to belong. Very much like Gatsby and The Great Gatsby, Amy is the golden girl to Nick. You know, he probably grew up reading the amazing Amy books. Nick loves the attention he gets from being with her, and he loves that being with Amy connects him to a better world. They got married on a yacht. Her parents brought him that brownstone. He's like, I thought quinoa was a fish. Obviously, he does very well financially by marrying Amy, but Nick is more interested in the fact that he triumphed over Desi. Nick says Desi is the kind of guy he always wanted to be, but couldn't be. Nick says Desi seemed like the definition of a gentleman, a guy who could quote a great poet, order a rare scotch, and buy a woman the right piece of vintage jewelry. He seemed, in fact, a man who knew inherently what women wanted, and across from him I felt my suit wilt and my manner go clumsy. I had a swelling urge to discuss football and fart. These were the kinds of guys who always got to me. Nick has worn a $400 suit to this meeting, purchased with Amy's money, because he's so eager to get the approval of Desi. He wants people to think this is the kind of guy who could definitely get with Amy and sweep her off his feet. And of course, Desi ends up dismissing him. Part of the reason Nick stayed with Amy even after he already had somebody else was because Amy was his trophy. This was the one thing he had over Desi and guys like him, and he didn't want to let go. And this is why guys will often keep you on the shelf. It's literally called kin keeping. They don't want you, but they don't want another man to have you either. This is the real reason that Nick refused to divorce Amy. The money didn't matter to him. He knew that Amy could snap her fingers and have guys like Desi lining up for her. And, she was going to end up happier than ever with a new rich guy, and they were all, he felt, going to laugh about how he was so beneath her and he couldn't handle it. Now, Desi had a different kind of psychosis. He's already been gifted by nature. He's sort of like a male version of Amy. He's rich, he's pristine, he's intelligent, he's talented. This is why Nick hates him. He already has everything he could ever want materially, but Desi wants Amy specifically for a couple of reasons. Number one, because he can't have her. He's a wealthy guy, he's not used to hearing no, and Amy represents Desi's perfect substitute mother. Even Nick notices the distinct resemblance between Jacqueline, Desi's mother, and Amy. Nick describes Jacqueline as looking like a picture of Amy that's out in the steam. So he looks like a guy who's using Amy to fill a need. He wants to replicate his own perfect family life. Listen to what Desi has to say about Amy. Nick says to him, you had a very intense relationship with Amy. And he says it wasn't only her looks. See, when Amy likes you, when she's interested in you, her attention is so warm and reassuring and entirely enveloping, like a warm bath. Bear with me. You feel good about yourself. Completely good for maybe the first time. And then she sees your flaws and she realizes you're just another regular person she has to deal with. You are in actuality Abel Andy, and in real life, Abel Andy would never make it with amazing Amy. So her interest fades and you stop feeling good and you can feel the old coldness. Once again, like you're naked on the bathroom floor and all you want is to get back into the bath. And Nick acknowledges mentally that what Desi is saying is the truth. He says he feels like he's been on the cold floor of the bathroom for about 3 years. So Desi only wants Amy because the moment that he had her 20 years ago, he finally felt like he was all the things he was trying to be. Amy was the center of this perfect teenage identity. And you're like, that sounds like love. No, it's not. It's obsession. And Amy notices that's why he has her frozen in time. Even though Desi's always written her letters and he must have become aware of the changes in her life, the only version of Amy he cares about is the one he's carried around in his head from prep school 20 plus years ago. He brings her to the house when he rescues her and he's planted her a room full of flowers. She's like, I don't even like these anymore. I like orchids. It's been, 25 years. Of course, I don't like the same stuff I liked when I was a girl. He says, oh, I painted your bedroom your favorite color and it's dusty rose. She says, I haven't liked dusty rose since the 80s. The first thing he does when he brings her to his house is to bring her makeup, different clothes, and hair dye. She's literally on the run, but he wants her to dye her hair back to her natural blonde so she'll look the way that he wants her to look. Even the type of clothing, Amy said that he had like a fall vision of them, an autumnal vision. So he was always making her wear sweaters and get under blankets that matched the sweaters. And it's very creepy. He's got this vision in his mind and he's trying to make her match the vision. It's very important for you to realize that everything men do is about women. They need you desperately. In their minds, the woman that they're looking at when they go to bed every night is either confirming their identity or she isn't. When Nick became a failure, he became angry at Amy. Now notice that Amy had not changed. Yeah, she started playing the cool girl role less, but in essential, she was the exact same person. But this began to anger Nick because he felt like he was no longer up to par. After he lost his job, he was resentful of having a woman he knew was his superior around. So he cheated with somebody much younger and much more vulnerable who was impressed with him to get that feeling back. He no longer wanted to do the work to compete and win a woman like Amy. He just wanted a woman who was easy to impress. So he went for Andy, who was young. He said, I like that I can still teach her things. After things didn't work out with Amy, Desi goes for a string of damaged women. Amy even notices that they always have eating disorders or severe mental health problems. She says Desi is at his best when he's at a bedside, not in bed, next to it, playing the hero. Desi never had to fight in the world for material things, and that's why he ends up being jealous of guys like Nick, who are more self-sufficient. But Desi wants to feel like there's more to him than his money, so he can be the perfect boyfriend or husband. He gets with women who feed that sense of identity in him. He wants to be a knight in shining armor. And this is why the women that men pursue are continually changing as the men enter different eras of their life. What they're trying to accomplish is different. When they are feeling good about themselves, they are going to go for the cream of the crop. They're not afraid to reach for a woman who seemed like she was out of their grasp, because if they win her, they are going to feel amazing about themselves. But when they are down to the bottom, they are going to go for someone who's going to build them up and make them feel better. When Nick was down to the bottom, he went for a college girl in the middle of nowhere who didn't know anything about anything, who couldn't challenge him. He went for an easy shot of self-esteem. Someone who was all looks and boobs. And Nick and Desi had these major problems with each other, and they both wanted to triumph by winning Amy so they could triumph over each other. And Amy was so brilliant, she continued to stoke the fires of their competition so that she could come out on top. It was a brilliant bit of misdirection. She kept writing to Desi and at the same time told Nick that she was afraid of him, was very obvious about throwing away his letters. But she made sure to let Nick know, hey, Desi's moved. He lives just a couple hours down the road now. And to Desi, she tells him, oh, Nick is cruel, Nick is violent, Nick is just a big stereotype, a violent Midwestern man who's jealous of my intelligence and he beats me and all this stuff. Because she knows that Desi is jealous of that good old boy Americanness, self-sufficiency that Nick has, and that Nick is jealous of the wealth, sophistication that Desi exudes. The lesson here is that men want to use you as a tool to define their identity. Do not let them. If you're smart, you will read their insecurities like Amy does here.
He is never present. He's almost always thinking about the past, because in the past, he has the most power over the women in his life. When he thinks about Margot, she's a child who he's teaching something. When Nick is with his sister in the bar in chapter 1, he says he pictures Go as a 10-year-old. Why? They're supposedly besties who talk all the time. So why are you picturing a nostalgic version of her when she's right in front of you? And not only nostalgic, prepubescent, because that's when she was most like a boy, like himself. Nick hates women. Go is a woman who's most like him, and she's not a nurturer, she's not a pretty girly girl, and it makes him uncomfortable to see the real her. And again, you see this in a lot of his behavior. He'll blame Amy for something that he himself doesn't like, and he's projecting his stuff onto her. He blames Amy for not wanting to get to know his hometown, but he stayed in New York by choice for years. He hates his home, but he pretends to glorify it. He wants what he doesn't have, and he's deeply insecure, which is why he craves constant distraction from what's happening in the moment. He whines all the time now about how he lost his job as a magazine writer, but when he was writing at the magazine, he was fantasizing about how he was going to be a novelist or a nonfiction bestseller. He's always looking for a different angle. He only returned to Missouri when he failed as a writer in New York, but he was uncomfortable when he lived in New York, even though he had worked his whole life to be there. He's never satisfied where he is. He claimed he was so dissatisfied in his marriage with Amy, he had to run out and get a different girl, his mistress Andy, only to spend all his time with Andy talking about Amy. In Missouri, he claims he's going to take up his dreams of being a nonfiction writer or a novelist. Yet again, he's looking at the angles, but what does he spend the most time doing? Sitting in an old abandoned garage reading back issues of his magazine. Beware of men who glorify the past because they're going to find some reason why you're the problem in the present. And that's exactly what Nick did. His relationship with Andy contained a lot of do-overs. He couldn't make grown-up Amy act the exact way he wanted her to act, so instead he found himself a 23-year-old girl who he could manipulate into admiring him and behaving the way he wished Amy would in the exact same scenario. So he and Amy go to the mall in Hannibal. They have an okay day. Nick is unsatisfied. He goes and he has the same day over with Andy. It's psychotic. He takes her to his family's haunts, to his sister's house, to his father's house, not just because he was too cheap to spring for a hotel room, but because these are places where he's had a bad time with his wife, like going through his father's house after he had to be put in the nursing home, or being at his mother's house, now Go's house, after she passes away. Nick claimed it's because he didn't have many options for where they could have his affair. But the truth be told, he was specifically going to places where he had shared memories that he wasn't so fond of with Amy to recreate them better in his mind with Andy. He wanted to ameliorate the hurt of his wife holding him accountable and expecting him to contribute as a grown man to their relationship. Instead, all he wanted was a little girl who was going to follow him around like a puppy and admire him and hang on his every word. And here we tie back into the point of entanglement. Nick is an incel who got everything he wanted, and yet he wasn't satisfied. As Cool Girl Amy and later Cool Girl Andy proved to us, giving men what they say they want is never going to get you what you want out of the relationship because they don't even know themselves. If someone asked Nick to describe himself, he would say he was a writer. He would say he was confident. He would say he was a nice guy. He was open and honest. Writer, debatable, and everything else is a lie. Even though the reader sees from Nick's own perspective, they don't know anything about him. He's constantly lying. He's an incredibly unreliable narrator. And no one around him knows him. Not his wife, not his twin sister and supposed best friend, not his mistress. He is more than guarded. He is pathologically mistruthful, especially to himself. And a lot of men in the text share his affliction. Tommy O'Hara, when he talks about cheating on Amy, even after she almost sends him to prison on the rape charge and he is completely fearful of her, he can never admit what he did. He just says things like, I started seeing another girl, no big deal, even though he was supposed to be in a relationship with Amy. And that cavalier attitude towards the harm they do to women, I think, is what this book is really about. So Tommy O'Hara and Nick both cheat on Amy, and she has decided that is a crime. She says of Nick, he stole my soul. He murdered my soul, and that's a crime, at least according to me. In their everyday dealings with women, men are often cruel and careless. They will do things like cheat and lie, use them for their emotional labor, their money, their social status, and there's no societal penalty for that. And I think the point of Amy lying about all these crimes that men do commit in real life is the fact that no man cared. No man actually protected her. I mean, she went to the police about Tommy O'Hara. She ended up withdrawing the charges, but nobody tried to make them stick. In real life, women are hurt like that all the time. They're SA'd, they're harmed by their fathers, they're beaten by their husbands, and oftentimes nothing happens. And every supposed good man in her life only cared about how they could use the information she had been hurt by another man to get over. And that was with real crimes. On a more micro level, with the things like cheating and breaking her heart, spending up all her money, she had no recourse. There's no law against those things, and nobody cared. It was up to her to seek her own justice. And now we've come full circle. I can't emphasize this enough. Don't commit any crimes. But I think Amy's example does show that there's no justice as a woman unless you create some. There's never going to be any parity. The world is not going to make him treat you a certain way. When you're a good woman and you get kicked in the teeth, because I guarantee you will get kicked in the teeth, The world's going to tell you, don't stoop to his level. Don't try to get revenge. You just go on with your life. You be dignified. You be the bigger person. And they count on that. They count on you doing nothing. So they have reaped all the benefits of being with you. They have siphoned away everything that they came for. They got to use your resources, whether that resource was your beauty to advance them, your social currency, your money, your labor, your body to birth their child, anything. They got all that, and then they got to use your magic to upgrade to their newer, bouncier, cool girl, and you have the cold comfort that you were the bigger person. First of all, never get into these situations. Make sure any relationship that you're in is serving you. The minute Nick stopped with wooing her, the minute he stopped being great, she should have been out. But the truth is, she never should have even gotten into the relationship because it was so unequal. Amy allowed temporary loneliness and what she felt was the judgment of other people because she'd gotten to a certain age and she wasn't married cloud her judgment. The woman had a master's in psychology. She knew from the start Nick was not right for her, but he was fine and he was packing and she was lonely. So lonely, she was willing to pretend to be somebody else in hopes of getting his approval. And we see what happens. Men who cannot like you is because they don't like themselves. And if you think you're lonely now, just wait until you get into a relationship with someone who doesn't even like you, who is resentful when you ask them to be a partner, who doesn't even want to show up in the most basic of ways. That's going to be real loneliness and real danger too. Before you stick your neck out as a woman, be damn sure this is what you want, because you're the one who's going to have to pay the consequences either way. And remember, you don't have to settle. And you'll be much better off if you do not. That's it. Like and follow for more, and don't forget to subscribe here for more content like this.